Hello, my name is Joanne, and my group has decided to look into how dairy alternatives influence the food system. Dairy alternative products has become popularized in recent years. These products are commonly found in grocery stores and cafes because they are deemed healthier and more ethical. Despite the narratives resonating to the general public, these claims often conceal the systemic inequities of dairy alternatives throughout the process. The rise of plant-based milk show how corporate branding shapes consumer perceptions. Brands use nostalgic marketing to create feelings of comfort, distancing themselves from political debates about food systems. While visually appealing, dairy alternatives are often seen as a luxury due to higher price and limited availability. As a result, consumer motivations shift from health and environmental concerns to lifestyle choices. Dairy alternatives are often marketed as symbols of personal identity rather than tools for collective change. This branding often conceals issues of greenwashing, where companies label products as sustainable or ethical despite problems like resource extraction and labor exploitation. These labels justify higher prices and promote the idea of the ethical consumer as the solution. Marketing and retail of dairy alternatives often mask a profit-driven system instead of fostering genuine environmental justice. When discussing plant-based milks, it is essential to understand their varied environmental impacts. Depending on the crop, different environmental harms will take place. Unfortunately, these issues are rarely addressed in marketing, despite companies using vague terms like plant-based or plant-forward. Overall, much of the environmental rhetoric and advertising is superficial, with many corporations using sustainability as a branding tool while maintaining profit-driven industrial practices. As dairy alternatives grow in popularity, marketing influences perceptions of the environmental and social impacts. Many plant-based milks are packaged in multi-layer cartons that are hard to recycle, contributing to emissions and waste. Additionally, transportation costs can make these products more expensive for remote communities, creating more inequalities. Despite the claims of being eco-friendly, these alternatives often rely on industrial agricultural practices like monocropping and synthetic fertilizers, which highlight persistent environmental issues. Retailers often prioritize profit over affordability, leading to higher prices and limited access for lower income consumers, especially in northern regions. Communities without access still face environmental harms due to resource extraction and waste facilities. Although ethical consumption is marketed as a solution, this only benefits middle and upper classes who can afford premium goods. Corporate marketing tends to focus on consumer desires rather than social justice, emphasizing individual choices over systemic change. This reflects a larger issue in Western agribusiness, which often overlooks indigenous and local ecological knowledge that values reciprocity and stewardship. Consequently, despite promoting dairy alternatives as ethical, the food system continues to perpetuate inequities and power disparities. Marketing strategies for dairy alternatives often create a misleading positive image that obscures the unethical treatment of dairy animals. Brands use ethical language to suggest responsibility, but often represents industry realities that ignore structural issues from food production to the stores. By emphasizing personal choice, companies maintain the current food system rather than fostering meaningful change. Capitalism drives the industry, implying that real change is equated with buying the right product instead of addressing systemic exploitation and environmental harm. Finally, Ideas like alternative hedonism can shift into mainstream consumerism, becoming branding tactics that reinforce the market logic they seek to challenge. I will now let Xingtong, who examined the marketing part of dairy alternatives, explain an advertisement that reflects all the points mentioned.
I will explain how the marketing of dairy alternatives contribute to the maintenance of the status quo using scenes from the short film At School, which was created by the dairy alternative brand Oatly to campaign against dairy milk in the year 2017.
Havre, havre, havredryck! Wow, wow, wow!
Tony! Tony!
Havredryck! Wow, wow, wow!
Hallå!
Havredryck!
Stopp! Du kan inte göra reklam på skolan för din havredryck.
Men EU sätter ju affischer för mjölkstöd.
Alltså de är barn, de behöver stöd. Mjölken är bra, de behöver näring.
Kan man inte ge stöd åt vegetariska drycker också då, inte bara mjölk?
Vad är fel med mjölk?
Och vad är fel med havredryck? Man har en rättvisa åt barnen, att de ska få välja. Valfrihet åt barnen! Rättvisa åt alla! Rättvisa! Rättvisa åt barnen! Havre! Havre! Havre!
Now we're going to analyze some of the scenes. For the first scene, which was in the very beginning of the film, the protagonist was seen passionately advocating for plant-based milk alternatives outside of a school. This is followed by the second scene, where we can see the antagonist, who was shown as a comical figure with a cow mask over his head, attempted to stop the protagonist from advocating for plant-based milk. To which the protagonist replied by doubting why dairy milk is allowed to be promoted across schools in Europe, while plant-based milk is forbidden in the third scene. At the end of the film, the protagonist continued to drive around school in a car with the eye-catching Oatly logo, and he keenly chanted for plant-based milk to be promoted in school, while the words, "Is everything you know about milk correct?" were displayed in the center of the screen in Swedish, suggesting an opposition to the dairy industry. Together, it is shown that instead of directly depicting the dairy industry as an oppressive sector that treats animals unfairly, the film by Oatly used the narratives of both the protagonist and the antagonist to motivate individuals to actively engage in the resistance against the dairy industry by purchasing ethical plant milk. Such an emphasis on individualizing animal welfare changes through ethical consumerism can lead to a nuanced form of political action that is completely dependent on market-based financial incentives. It also creates a false sense of political engagement amongst the consumers while continuing to uphold the exploitative capitalist world food system as the status quo.
To wrap up what was mentioned, despite the narrative of dairy alternatives being a more viable option to its predecessor, systemic inequities continue to take place. Constructed marketing and retail strategies often hide the true intentions of large corporations. Environmental harm is due to the result of unethical processes from the beginning to the final product. And lastly, barriers in affordability, availability, and accessibility is still intentionally hidden.